Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today I'm going to be bringing you the ultimate guide for how to tune your cars for drifting in GTA 5 online. Now in this video I aim to show you the way to go ahead and set up your cars for drifting, and I'm also going to be showing you the kind of cosmetic and performance upgrades you should be putting on your cars depending on the style of drifting you're going for or the car that you have, and how those performance upgrades are going to go ahead and affect your ability to drift. As well as that, I am going to go ahead and show you how to set up drift cars from both in the tuners update and for any cars released prior to that, as there are some key differences between the two which I will highlight. But if you do enjoy this video, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. It would help out massively. And as well, if you are interested in this style of content, do check out my drifting playlist in the top right, as I feel like that might be of interest to you. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy the video and let's get into it. And now let's get into how to set up your car for drifting. Now first things first, I'm going to be covering the absolute essentials you must do for pretty much every drift build you want to make, and then later I'm going to be covering some other topics and maybe some more nuanced options you might want to follow. But for this essential section, this pretty much all applies to pretty much every car in the game, and if there's a difference between a car made before and after the tuners update, I will specify it. But first things first, we're going to be covering the tires. For any car released before the tuners update which does not have the low grip tires option, leave the tires standard or stock. The reason is that equipping the bulletproof tires changes the damage model of the car and actually makes it impossible to stance. It can be removed once you go ahead and put the tires back on, but stancing is absolutely essential for any cars from before the tuners update. So all of those older vehicles that you can go ahead and stance, such as the Futo, if you go ahead and shoot, knock down the height a little bit, it's actually going to go ahead and make the car super slippery and make it have a ton less grip. This is absolutely crucial if you want to be drifting those older vehicles and use the old style of drifting. So I just recommend you stay away from bulletproof tires on that regard. Now when talking about vehicles released in the tuners update, bulletproof tires aren't going to completely destroy your build anymore, as you can go ahead and get that low traction bonus by stancing your car in your interaction menu. This can just be done by going to the vehicle stance option and lowering it, and that will give you a lower grip bonus. However, choosing your tires at this point is personal preference. There are different uses for each kind of tire, and equipping bulletproof tires or standard tires over those low grip tires can prove effective with some vehicles that are higher powered, like let's say the RT3000 or the ZR350. Using bulletproof tires on these cars is completely fine and you can still drift perfectly well with them. But in other cases, you might prefer to use those lower grip tires if you want to go full drift missile mode, or maybe your cars are a little bit more underpowered and maybe need to have a little something to help it lose a bit more traction. That is a situation where you could go ahead and use those low grip tires, let's say with the Remus. But overall, it's really personal preference at that point. There's a lot of different uses between them, and really it's between those standard and those bulletproof tires, and then the low grip tires. It depends heavily on your drifting style. Typically for beginners, you're probably going to be more used to those slower speed drifting kind of things, so maybe those lower grip tires are going to be more helpful, whereas those standard or bulletproof tires might be useful for somebody who's a bit more experienced. Now generally I'd advise you to leave your brakes stock. Now this is because in some cases when you are going to be using those brakes, it will go ahead and slow down your momentum, and it's going to be easier to kill off your drift if you are going to be trying to adjust with your brakes. This isn't done all that often unless you're going to be going for something like some more interesting entries, like reverse entries, 360 entries, that kind of thing. That's done sometimes, but it isn't done all that often, as most people drift using the handbrake method, the single gear drifting, or will be using the mid-drive speed boost. But there's no benefit to upgrading your brakes, so I'd recommend leaving them stock. Moving on to the more performance side of the build, now you're going to want to, in pretty much every single case, make sure that your engine and your turbo are fully upgraded. The higher that you've got it upgraded, the better, as it's going to give you a lot more power, which is going to make the car have more wheel spin, and in turn make it a lot easier to drift. That is pretty much for all cases. However, with the transmission, it depends highly on your drifting style. Beginners who are going to be using single gear drifting or that handbrake kind of drifting are probably going to want to stick with the transmission being stock, as it will be a lot longer for the gears to actually change up, and it will be a lot easier and a lot more consistent to stay in one gear. But people who are more experienced and are using techniques such as the mid-drive speed boost to go ahead and drift are going to want to have the race transmission the maximum amount possible, as it's going to make it far more effective. Moving on to spoilers, for the vast majority of your builds, you're going to want to make sure that you have no spoiler equipped. Adding a spoiler will in fact add traction, which is something you pretty much don't want for the vast majority of your drift build, so leave it stock. There are very select situations where cars that are a bit twitchy or very high powered and maybe more difficult to handle can in fact equip a spoiler, which may help you, such as the ZR350, the Banshee 900R, and the RT3000. These are some select examples though, and on the majority. So in most cases you will want to just make sure that the spoiler is left to its stock option and you don't equip one. Moving on to the suspension option. If you have a car from before the Tuners DLC, the way the suspension affects drifting is that the lower the car is, the less grip it will have, so it will be a lot harder to control at the bonus of you having reduced traction. So this is quite effective for cars that are maybe a little underpowered, or you just want to be a lot more slippery. So let's say the Karin Futo, that's a little bit underpowered. You want to go ahead and make sure cars like that are more slammed down to the ground, so you can go ahead and make them a bit more slippery. But in other cases where you have a car that's a bit higher powered and maybe, you know, is a bit hard to control, it's a bit more twitchy, let's say even the Banshee 900R, you want to go ahead and equip those higher options with the suspension, maybe on the higher 2 or 3 selection options, just so the car is a little bit more controllable and is a little bit more stable. Of course, you can still have really high powered cars with lowered suspension all the way if you're confident enough, but upping it a couple will help out drastically with control. Now, with the Tuners cars, it is the same system but reversed essentially. With the car being slammed all the way down, the vehicle is going to be slightly more grippy and will in fact be a little bit harder to initiate drifts with, but be more controllable. But with the stock and the higher up suspension option, the car is actually going to be more slippery and a bit harder to control. So once again, if you have a car from the Tuners DLC that you want to go ahead and make a little bit more slippery, you know, you want it to kick out a bit more, keep the suspension at those higher levels. But instead, if the car is very difficult for you to handle, I recommend going ahead and putting the suspension down all the way, keep it nice and low. Now finally, to conclude the essentials section, I'm going to quickly touch on wheel choice. Now for your wheel choice, as long as you pick any of the classes of wheels other than the off-road section, your car will be completely fine to drift. In my opinion, there is no noticeable difference between the classes other than their visual appearance, and I don't see any kind of alteration that really gives any one class an advantage or disadvantage for drifting. So purely just pick it for its cosmetic option, and as long as it's not in the off-road class, you can pick what you like and you will be completely fine to drift. So that is going to conclude the absolute essentials that you need to keep in mind while tuning your car ready to drift in GTA 5 Online. Now, any performance part or cosmetic part I haven't mentioned currently can be simply treated as cosmetic. So bumpers, hoods, respray color, light color, you know, side skirts, all of that are purely cosmetic options which will not affect your ability to drift, and any slight performance change is so incredibly small the average player is not going to go ahead and notice. Your car will be completely fine to drift no matter if you have the craziest body kit on it or the most tame, simplistic looking street build. It is completely fine. Now, I do want to go ahead and say that if you do want to improve at drifting, I'd highly recommend you check out my drift guide, which I'll link in the top right. But that is going to be it for today's video. So I'd just like to say, if you did enjoy, please do leave a like and subscribe for more. It'd be greatly appreciated if you could. And as well, if you're interested in finding people to drift with, people to hang out with, or you're interested in GTA 5 car meets, I'd highly recommend you join my Discord server as well, which will be linked in the description. But that's going to be it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.